Hello and welcome to the Read to Know podcast, where the goal is to actually remember what you read so then you can better apply it to your life. On this podcast, we go through a book one chapter at a time, and then we actually practice remembering what we've read. So if you want to follow along, we're currently working our way through Bob Goff's book, Dream Big. I'm Zach Brown, and my friend Chris Yarber is joining me to help discuss and break down this book. Also, if you're on Apple Podcasts, it would be huge if you left a rating and review for us. It would help out a ton. If you're not on Apple Podcasts, no worries. Just send this to a friend who might be interested. Anyway, thanks again for listening and enjoy the conversation. So yesterday, Chris, on the podcast, we were talking about gathering up our ambitions. And, last night I was doing a little bit of thinking, kind of revisiting some of my, ambition lists. And I'm like, what else? Just thinking, what do I want? Is there something, what could I put in my basket, And one thing I thought of, and I wanted to mention here, one of the ambitions that I had. Uh-huh. It's a right now it's probably a kind of a lofty goal, but I believe that we could make this happen.
Okay.
I would like to get the podcast in the top 10 rankings on Apple Podcasts in the self-development category.
Wow.
In the U.S. specifically. Yes. I mean, other countries, that'd be great too, but in the U.S., top 10 in self-development.
Yeah.
I think we can do it. I think we can make it happen.
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah.
So America, get us to the top 10. Let's go. We're counting on you, America.
We're counting on you. Apple Podcast and Spotify as well. And
I don't know. Spotify doesn't have podcast rankings at the moment.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that doesn't help us.
Right. Just speculating. Maybe they will add it at some point because apparently they're adding a video feature even now to the podcast section of Spotify. Okay. Because, just tidbit, if anyone's interested, when Joe Rogan moves to Spotify exclusively, they will add video because even the full episodes of Joe Rogan will not be on YouTube. Right. They'll only be on Spotify.
Only on Spotify, yeah.
So
that's
video's
awesome.
coming. Video podcasts are coming to Spotify at some point. So who knows? Maybe they'll add rankings and stuff too. So either way, it should be interesting to see what happens to Spotify in the podcast game.
Right. Yeah, that's exciting. I think that's a worthy ambition. I didn't write any down.
Yeah.
Which I need to, because if not, they'll escape my memory. But I thought of a couple. One a little bit more serious. One a little bit funnier. I would love to conquer my fear of roller coasters.
Really?
I am scared. I am so scared of heights, and I don't like going very fast. And that's what a roller coaster is. High and fast. So I would love to get over my fear of roller coasters. In high school,
I tell you what, that's really awesome. I don't think we've ever talked about that, but that sounds like an awesome ambition, and I would love to help you out with that.
Well, I know that you have a lot of experience when it comes to roller coasters, so
Yeah.
I thought of you as I was thinking about this. And so that one's kind of funny, but I really would like to do that. I would like to enjoy roller coasters. And then also, I would love to, and I don't know what this looks like. This is just put on my list, and it's not very specific either, so I need to get more specific with it, is I would love to help people out in their marriages as well. Do something with my wife and I, a little bit about, some of the stuff that we've been through together. And so I'd like to use some of that experience to help other marriages out, and especially training couples who aren't married to get to marriage and to make it successful. I think that would be a worthy ambition as well. So, but that's not very specific. I don't really know what that looks like, but still, yeah.
Right. Yeah. That both great ambitions.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, we need to plan a trip. I think if we do this roller coaster thing, I think we should do it right.
Right.
And we should go to Cedar Point. We'll make a trip. We'll go all the way up to my home state.
I was scared you were
the great state of Ohio, to visit Cedar Point.
Because they have one of the highest roller. Don't they have one of the highest roller coasters in the world?
It's one of, if not the highest one in the country.
Gosh.
Oh
no.
It's one of the top in the world, but overall the best. I think one of if not the best roller coaster amusement park in the country.
See, I'm feeling kind of sick just thinking about it. when I see a roller
Dude, I'm
coaster in the
exci-
distance,
I'm excited right now.
because when I travel from here in Georgia to my where I grew up in Virginia, I pass a amusement park every time on the interstate. It's off the interstate, and I see those rolling hills. Oh, it makes me sick just looking at them.
Really? See, I didn't know this.
Yeah. So,
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's go to Cedar
Right.
Point,
Let's go
man.
to Cedar Point.
I'm excited for this.
Anyway.
Okay.
If you're listening and you want to help me out with that, send a couple tickets to readtonopod at Gmail.
If anyone's got, some Cedar Point tickets to, connections to hook us up with, that'd be fantastic. Right. All right, so getting into the meat of this episode, we're talking about chapter 15 today, Sizing Up. The subtitle is You Can't Achieve an Ambition Without Choosing It First. And so basically, the last chapter, we've gathered our ambitions. We've made a big list of, everything that we would possibly be interested in. Now it's time to pick the winners, in a sense. Go through that list and figure out which ones are the right ones to chase right now at this, particular moment. And he has a couple, a story here at the beginning of the chapter about when he was in high school, wanting to go to prom, with the girl, and then also having $100 in his bank account. That was another ambition of his. Those two things. And funny, he got both of those things in 1 week, and then he lost them the same week. So, and he basically says all that to say, makes the point here that some ambitions are good ambitions. Some of them aren't lasting, though. Some of them are very short-lived. Yeah. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's basically saying that there's a difference in ambitions. There are small and maybe short-lived ones. There are larger ones that are longer stretching and maybe even lifelong ambitions. So first off, you have to kind of go through that list and figure out where do those fall under? Are they smaller? Are they kind of medium sized? Or are they larger? And then figure out which one of those are the ones that you want stretching out across your entire life, in a sense. If I had to do this for like 20 years, work at the same ambition for 20 years, would I want to? And then at the end of the chapter, he also asks the question, if it all came burning down to the ground, would you do it again?
Right. Yeah.
And so that's kind of what this whole chapter is, figuring out the winners out of the group of ambitions that you have.
Right. Yeah. After you've made the list, this is really where the vetting process, as he talks about in chapter 14, begins. And so through the questions that he asks and through different sections in this whole entire chapter, he pretty much shows us different avenues in which this vetting process can work. And like you said, he does start off with this story, and he starts off with this story to say, whether it's a relationship or a job, some ambitions aren't worth chasing if those things don't want us back. And so there are some clear tell signs to there are times in our life where we have these signs where we should notice those and stop following those ambitions. And then not only does he stop there, but he also starts asking different questions as to, consider this, and this, and this, and we'll get into these questions concerning in this chapter. But this is a chapter where this vetting process really begins.
Right. Yeah. So these questions that he wants us to ask are really just kind of questions of like what is really worthwhile to me. And I like what he says. What do you care about? What are you willing to risk everything for? And then also the question of why are you afraid?
Right.
And he's really just kind of diving in here, like trying to get to going back to the why behind the what. Mm-hmm. And really thinking about what, your life trajectory, what is the things that would best line up with who you want to be, the person that you want to be, and at the end of your life, what would you like to have done?
Yes.
So thinking about that, going through that list of ambitions with all that in mind, he wants you to kind of sort out what are the small ambitions, what are the medium ambitions, and what are the large ambitions. And these can vary in difficulty, mm-hmm. and they can vary in length of like time to complete.
Right.
The smaller ones most of the times are simpler, and then they're also something that you can just are very more short-lived. And so something to learn, something to do, something to accomplish that can be done fairly quickly. But he says even the small ones, they can be just as important as the larger ones.
Right. Yeah. He says in this chapter not to confuse the small one with tasks, and also not to confuse task with small ambitions. Because really, I think Bob would define task as things that you do kind of every single day. There are certain things that we do every single day, certain things at our job, our place of work that we do every single day, and those would be described as tasks. But sometimes you can take what seems like a task and turn it into an ambition, where he shares a story of a neighbor of his who, to anyone else, taking out the trash would be a task. However, this man not only takes out his trash, but he's turned that task of taking out trash, and he takes out a lot of the other neighbors' trash as well. And he's turned that into an ambition to show people love, not going across, the ocean to do that, but doing it right there in their neighborhood. And so in that way, he's been able to take that really small item and do that every single week, and it's really lived up to an ambition of his. So that's just one idea of kind of a small ambition that we're talking about. But if you've been wondering kind of what the difference between task and ambition is, those tasks, you kind of do them every day.
Right. And the great thing about small ambitions is that they're often great momentum builders for the larger ambitions, because it's something that can be achieved pretty quickly. You can get that, and then you have some confidence, you kind of have some positive momentum going, and you can jump on that. You can take advantage of that and moving the ball further down the field in other areas and other ambitions.
Right.
So then moving on to medium size, it's a little bit more difficult, a little bit more time consuming. So there's a little bit more effort involved.
Right.
But again, I think, he mentions you have to remind yourself of the why with these, especially with these medium and larger ambitions, because that's what's going to help you keep moving forward.
Right.
And then you have obviously the large, and he says seemingly impossible ambitions. And seemingly impossible because it may feel impossible, but it's really probably more possible than we even anticipate or would imagine.
Right.
And I like how he says here at one point, he mentions that, don't expect these large ambitions to just kind of walk into your life and happen, because it's not how it's going to work. And, these larger ambitions, some of them stretch decades. And he mentioned some in this chapter that some span decades of his life, and even pretty much his entire life. It's like a lifelong ambition that he's constantly working on.
Right.
And that's why these ambitions should be important, and they should really hit a few, they should check a few boxes for you, so that you're, one, not wasting time, but two, when it gets tough and when things go backwards and you lose momentum on it, you can stick with it and you won't give up, because it's something that is actually worth the effort for you.
Yeah, and it's also these small and medium ambitions along the way that give us that momentum and that power to keep pushing forward. So that's why, small ambitions are good to pick out, even if you are kind of working on some larger ones at the moment, because they re-energize you in a sense, and you can take those and see that as a victory, and kind of remind yourself that as long as you remember the purpose behind what you're doing, and you don't give up, and you're courageous and all of those good things, then these large ambitions that may seem impossible, there is a difference between what seems impossible and what's literally impossible for us to do, but these large ambitions that seem impossible, they become more and more possible, I think, as we grow in those smaller ambitions.
Right. Yeah. And so he gives us here like what I would consider like just a few boxes to check off.
Right.
For these ambitions that we're testing out, that we're sizing up when we're trying to figure out which ones are worth our effort. He gives us a few things to kind of consider. And let's just go ahead and open the book up here to this section,
Yes,
just
yeah,
so
'cause
we
this is-
don't forget any of these, because I want to mention all of them.
Right. I don't want to butcher this because it's such a good section, and we want you to listen to each of these. Some of these are questions, some of them are not. But this is a good checklist to go down through mentally as you go through your list of ambitions.
Yeah.
So go ahead and start us off, Zach.
All right. So the first one here, he just asked, "Is your ambition meaningful?" And that's what he said. He says here a lot of this stuff, taking the time to kind of go through these steps and check these boxes. He said it's also something that's going to take time and effort to even just do that. You know what I mean? We have to be conscious about the way we're approaching this, and that the way that we are tackling this task of going through these ambitions and figuring out which ones are worth chasing. But the first one is, again, is your ambition meaningful? And he says a lot of the things that we may spend our time doing just really can not be sometimes, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? And we end up chasing things that really don't have any significance in our lives. And for some people it may, and but others, we know, the thing is, he says, we have to answer these questions ourselves. No one can answer these questions for us, because he gives the example, are you busy with Netflix or golf or whatever as distractions, basically, as wasting time in a sense,
right,
and not chasing something that's more meaningful,
right?
And again, those things aren't bad if you're resting for rest and rejuvenation,
right?
But only you know when that line is crossed from rest and rejuvenation into wasting time and being preoccupied with things that are less important.
Yeah, I've also done things in my life though where you kind of question whether or not it's meaningful. At one time, you may think it is, then you kind of get into it a little bit and you're not quite sure. That's why I find this second one so important. Try on your ambition, which he says here, take your ambitions out on a date, try it out, give it a little bit of time, maybe devote yourself a little bit to it for a certain period of time, and then come back and reflect. Try on your ambition, because he says, remember, your ambition will only have value to you if you give it space in your life. So some things we have to give it space to, but before we dedicate a decade of our lives to this large ambition, let's try it out and see if it's worth spending a decade on. And if it's not, then you've saved yourself 9 years and a couple months versus a whole decade, wishing the whole time you wouldn't have set it as a priority. Right,
exactly. Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's the thing. I think as a culture, and part of this comes from social media, and not to kind of backtrack a little bit here, but in that first question here, he asks, are you catching up on everyone else's lives on social media, or are you exploring and expanding yours?
Yeah.
And that one's so huge for me, because I mean, again, you can use social media to catch up with your friends and keep connected, but then eventually, I think probably for everyone, but I know this, eventually it turns into just kind of wasting time on those applications when you really could be working on something else, something a lot more meaningful. And sometimes that's a hard thing to balance.
Yeah.
And, continuing on with the next section, the thought that you were making about trying on your ambition, I think that's something that partly stems from social media, that we get stuck in this. We feel like we can't try new things and then give up if we don't feel like it fits. You know what I mean? I think sometimes this has happened to me. What if I've thought about this. I've told you about this. I've thought about starting a podcast for the last 3 years. Right. So for the last 3 years, it's been in the back of my head, I'd like to start a podcast. I'd like to do that. But I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know what I would do. And so if I think, okay, if I have someone here and I talk to them, and I get a new person every week, how am I going to sustain that? If I start this podcast, and then I can't put out an episode every week, then I'm gonna fail, basically. You know what I mean? And it stopped me from doing it. Now I'm glad I got this idea here that is a little bit more sustainable, and we can sit here and we can make these episodes, and we're able to even do it daily for a little bit. We're not going to do it daily forever, because that
no, not at all.
That's not sustainable.
We tried this on. Tried this on the daily episodes. We did, but
yeah, you want to talk about trying something on? We're trying the daily, and I am glad that we're trying it, but to be honest, I'm excited to get back to weekly after this book is over.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we're doing it. I'm glad we're trying it. And that's the thing. We weren't afraid to try it.
Right.
Even if later we decide, we're not going to do that again.
Right.
It's okay.
Right.
We're trying it.
And social media does kind of put that pressure on you. But we have to remember, no one remembers your life anyway. They're too consumed with their own. And so if you were to, a couple years ago, start a podcast and it was a failure, and you did like, 2, 3 episodes or something like that, and it just ended up not going well, you found out it wasn't sustainable, no one would remember that.
Right.
They just don't remember those things. And so it's totally okay to try something on.
It's really not that big a deal.
No.
Try it, and then you can decide, hey, you know what? That didn't work. Whatever. That's not. I wasn't really feeling it.
Right.
It's okay. But I think a lot of us, if we were honest with ourselves, because it's true for me, I'm sure it's true for you and other people as well, that sometimes the reason we don't try things is because we're afraid of how people will react to it if we try it, and then we just like, okay, then nope, stop, that wasn't for me.
Right.
That we think people will be like, oh man, that dude, that never he starts and then quits everything he does, or something like that, to that effect. And when that's not true, you know what I mean? You can try things and you can quit things just because if it's not you, it's not you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a difference between failing and trying something out.
Yeah.
There's a difference between those. You have permission to try things out, and you'll be better off for it. And then,
right. And I like this quote here at the end of this section. He says, "Remember, your ambition will only have the value to it if you give it space in your life. And if you're not willing to try it on in the first place, maybe it's just not worth pursuing."
Right.
So it's something you have to be willing to give it the space that it needs to try it out.
Yeah.
If it's something really worth pursuing.
Right. Yeah. That try on your ambition, I think one of the most formational to this section that he has here in this chapter. That's huge. Some of the others are a little bit smaller. I like this next one, will it last? Quite an easy question to understand. But he says here to stress test your ambition. Put a little stress on it. Yeah. In other words, ask yourself, will it matter in a year? Will this ambition matter in 10 years? How about 100 years? This is kind of where you can ask, will other people see this or notice this? Will it have a lasting effect? So will it last?
What is the shelf life on this?
Right.
And is it something that is significant enough to last throughout the years?
Yeah.
Moving on here, here's another question. Is it all about you, or will it help others? And, he says here, there's nothing inherently wrong about having something that does benefit you or is about you in a sense. But the thing is, where you're going to find the most fulfillment is actually at not just something that is others serving, but is at the crossroads of enjoyable for you and beneficial to other people. Right. At that crossroads is where good ambitions lie. Right.
Yeah. And this is not, Bob is a Christian, and of course he incorporates that into his writing. This I don't see as a Christian principle itself, though. To be honest with you, really, we all know, no matter what your religious beliefs are, I hate to use the term common sense, but in a way it is that, tell me, when you do good for other people, are you telling me that, no one can say that they don't get something in return for that, or that does not make them feel motivated to do more of that? It's a good feeling.
Right.
No matter what your, religious views may be. And he says here in this section that you'll know you're moving towards beautiful ambitions in your life if you find yourself wanting beautiful things for the people around you. So a lot of beauty there.
Yep. And he says you don't need to choose between ambitions that help others. Yeah. Between others and that help others or inspire you. You don't need to choose between ambitions that help others or inspire you. But you can do, usually good ambitions they fit both of those categories.
Right. They do. Yeah.
Yeah. So
No, I was just going to say, I have found that, people listening may not know this, but we read separately. You know, we talk out the chapters and stuff, but we read separately and highlight and underline and take notes separately and stuff like that. But we always end up underlining the same thing. So that's funny.
True. A lot of whatever he reads, I have underlined, and most of what I read he has underlined. And
right.
Yeah. So moving on to the next question he has here: what do you want to be remembered for? And so again, this is a legacy kind of question. You know, I like how he says, you know, you don't have to necessarily think about what your funeral feels like because that may be too predictable or sobering. But even just envisioning how your ambition gets talked about at the water cooler at work, you know. So again, just a different way to think about what do you want to be remembered for? You know, if people are talking about, hey, this thing that you did, you know, how are they talking about it? You know what I mean? And how does that fit? Does that feel, is that a good thing you want to leave behind?
Right. And I think some of these, I think some people would be tempted to say that larger ambitions kind of fit into the what do you want to be remembered for. I would disagree with that, though. I would say small and medium ones can as well. He doesn't say, will it be remembered by a lot of people? But what will it be remembered for? Just like Bob remembered that Paul, you know, took out his trash, you know, and he made that his small ambition. He's remembered for that. Maybe not be on a billboard in New York City, but he's remembered for that. And then that's a rather small question. He goes to the next question: is it possible? Which you kind of spoke to a little bit earlier, where he says, don't discard an ambition because it seems too hard or seemingly impossible. He says there's a difference between my ambition isn't realistic and I'm afraid to try, or this will be really hard.
Right.
So there is a difference between if I want to conquer my fear of roller coasters, that is realistic.
It's realistic. It's possible.
It is possible. Am I afraid to try? Yes. Is it going to be really difficult? Yes. You will have to drag me kicking and screaming on the roller coaster, but we're going to do it. But it's not unrealistic.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of the things. Like I think we mentioned this before, but a lot of the things that we may automatically assume as unrealistic really aren't.
No.
It just takes maybe more effort than it takes just more effort than just a normal activity or a smaller ambition.
That's right.
It might take more work, but it's still possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so those are the main questions, the main things to consider when, vetting your ambitions here.
Yeah.
And he moves on to a couple other sections. And again, just, understanding what is the difference between something that's realistic and something that's a pipe dream, as he says, if you're, what did he say? If you're 5'2" and 130 pounds and you want to play in the NBA,
probably not good. Yeah.
yeah, that's probably not going to happen. That's not realistic.
Right. It has to fit our abilities and it has to fit our attributes as well. And so as you're sizing these up, so just as a very small review as we come to a close of this book, sizing up, determining whether it's small, medium, or large, then going through those list of questions and topics we just spoke of there. And then also we have to ask ourselves, okay, does this fit my ability and my attributes? Because you have to physically and mentally, emotionally be able to conquer this, to consider it an ambition. So when you're making your list, it's fun to kind of come up with some of this what would seem like crazy stuff, but we know that we can kind of vet some of these things off the list if it doesn't fit our attributes or our abilities.
Right. And he sums up this chapter with this story about how he's working on a lodge that people could come and gather and he said have real meaningful conversations. And they spent years, working on this. And
right. This is a large ambition of his.
Right. A
large,
big ambition.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he says that some mistakes were made, and the whole thing burned down to the ground. and the thing is, it took them 4 or 5 years in order to get back to the place that they were at. And so he says all that to say, among the things that you have written down, which one of them would you spend 20 or more years making a reality?
Right.
Those are the ones to keep an eye on. And he continues, he says, then stress test that idea. Mm-hmm. If it all turned to ashes, would you rebuild it all over again? That's the kind of resolve and intent that he's talking about here. He said, you'll know you're on the scent of a worthwhile lasting ambition when a strong scent of smoldering fire wouldn't dampen your resolve to build it twice, even before you had built it for the first time.
Right. And it's that kind of purpose that is going to push you years and years and years into some of these larger ambitions, because we have to face the music that it's possible that things can either literally or figuratively all burn down. And would you be willing, in a sense, you have to ask yourself this question, would you be willing to start it over?
And he's not saying that, to say expect it to all be crumble, all crash down to the ground, but if it's something that is still worth the second effort in that
Yes.
in that sense, that's something you should pay attention to.
Right.
Because you might have something there. Because the things that we're willing to put the most effort in are usually the ones that line up. And it'll help us keep speed and momentum. It'll help us keep the momentum going when things get tough.
That's right.
Because we're so attached to that thing.
Right.
If you're willing to work through all that.
Right. Yeah. And that's the end of chapter 15.
Yeah.
Right there. And so tomorrow we'll be in chapter 16, Get the Sticks Before the Drums. Subtitle, It Doesn't Matter What Your Ambition Looks Like, It Matters What It Is.
Right. And that's the last chapter here in part 2.
Yes.
Of this book. So we're almost done with part 2. That'll be tomorrow. So anyway, thanks for listening, guys. If you have any thoughts on this chapter, feel free, let us know again at Read to Know Pod on all social platforms. Also, readtoknowpod@gmail.com. Feel free to email us with your thoughts on this chapter. With that being said, thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow for chapter 16.